Okay, hello and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, we're going to talk about the Hague Convention. Now, what the heck is the Hague Convention, you ask? Well, anybody who wants to adopt a child outside the United States is going to run into procedures where, if it falls under the Hague Convention, they must follow the procedures of the Hague Convention because the United States is now a party to the Hague Convention and has been since about 2008. And so if you adopted a child before 2006, then it can fall under the normal adoption procedures. Otherwise, if the Hague Convention, if the countries have both ratified and are part of the Hague Convention, then it's a matter of having to follow the procedures. So you'll need to first determine if your country or the country of where the child is part of the Hague Convention, and then if not, you can go under the normal adoption procedures. However, if they are a party, you are required to file under the Hague Convention. And just so you know, there's what's called an Appendix O Hague Adoption Convention countries, and there's more or less about 30 or 40, give or take, countries on there. Albania, Andorra, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Belarus, so forth. Israel, Togo, United Kingdom, United States, Vietnam. I mean, it lists a bunch of them. Just so you know, the Russian Federation, which you've probably heard are not even accepting adoptions from the U.S. anymore, they have basically entered into being a party of the Hague Convention but haven't ratified it. So for all intents and purposes, they are not, it's not a Hague Convention country from there. Now, what are the procedures for countries which are part of the Hague Convention, and also the Philippines? I mean, big countries are part of this particular convention. So, what are the procedures? And by the way, I misspoke. There's actually 87 signatory countries that are part of the Hague Convention, and so chances are, if you're adopting a child from a country, there's a reasonable possibility they do come from a Hague Convention country. So don't go forward with anything until you confirm what you need to do. And even before you adopt the child, you need to find out if it's a Hague Convention country, because there are procedures that need to be followed in order to make sure it's done correctly. Now, Congress, which ratified the Hague Convention, they have designated the Department of State to be what is called the central authority for monitoring requests under the Hague Convention and making sure that everything is complied with. Now, each country has its own version of a central authority to determine compliance with the Hague Convention. Now, there are several different items that you have to worry about when doing a Hague Convention, several procedures. Keep in mind that it applies, and I want to make sure that the date here is correct, it applies only to adoptions after April 1st, 2008. So if, for example, you're here in the U.S. and you're trying to get your adopted child back, petition them in the U.S. and they were adopted on, March of 2007, you will not only will you not be subject to the Hague Convention, you most likely are not going to be able to use it. So you'll want to, make sure the adoption did occur after April 1st, 2008, keeping in mind that most cases where the adoption was before then, they've already processed. So realistically, 99% of everyone watching this, or with clients that may come in, they will have already complied with this requirement, because that was several years ago. Now, if the United States child was adopted after April 1st, 2008 from the Hague Convention country, there's two more requirements that are critical in order to determine if the Hague Convention applies. Now, in the particular respect, the United States citizen who is adopting the child, if that United States citizen did not habitually reside in the United States, because there are U.S. citizens who move to France or, wherever, if they did not reside habitually in the United States, or if the child who's going to be adopted from the Hague country did not habitually reside in that Hague country, then the Hague Convention is not going to apply. So again, let's say that the child from the Philippines but has been living in China. Assuming that that is the case, then if you're looking at Philippines for being the Hague Convention country, it won't apply if the child was not habitually resident in the Philippines, or again, if the United States citizen was not habitually resident in the United States. If they, let's say they've lived in the Philippines for the last 15 years, okay? So the habitual residence of both the petitioner, which is the U.S. citizen, and the beneficiary, which is the adopted child, need to comply with those requirements. Now, the question is then, who may adopt under the Hague Convention? Well, only a married United States citizen whose spouse also adopts the child, or an unmarried United States citizen who is 25 years or older. So for non-orphan adoptions, lawful permanent residence cannot apply. It must be the U.S. citizen, okay? The visa petition must be filed before the child's 16th birthday. Now, whereas, there's I have a whole other video on adoptions, but whereas there the adoption must be final before the child's 16 years old, here it's a little more stringent in that the petition needs to be filed before the child's 16th birthday. And legislatively speaking, they would have done that so that if you're going to adopt a child and make the life better for the child, you don't want the child to grow up before you bring the petition. Otherwise, what's the use? So you'll need to get moving on that. Now, here is one item which is really a benefit to Hague country adoptions. The 2-year legal custody and joint residence requirements do not apply to Hague country adoptions. Now, if we were talking about regular adoption cases where you do the adoption and ultimately you file the I-130 and so forth, you have to prove that you lived with that child for 2 years and had joint residence requirements and custody and so forth prior to ever filing, or you're not going to do it. So, as in most cases, if you find a child you want to adopt, you can't just leave your work, leave the United States for 2 years to meet this requirement. So a lot of children, unfortunately, can't be petitioned under normal adoption procedures. But under the Hague Convention, that 2-year requirement is not a requirement. You could, petition the child on day 1, not live a day with that child, and still come forward with the Hague Convention petition. Now, here's another difference. With normal adoption petitions, you can adopt either here in the U.S. or at the home country, but with Hague country adoptions, the child must be adopted abroad in the foreign country being outside the U.S. and the Hague country that the child lives in. Okay, now we've talked about the USC's habitual residence, and there's some issues on that as to when they can file the petition and when they have the intent to go back to the United States, if they're and they being the U.S. citizen or not in the United States and so forth, if they are living with the child. Because again, even if you are a USC and have lived with the child for 2 years outside the country, you still need to meet the Hague country requirements. So you would have to then argue habitual residence inside the United States at the appropriate time, depending on your intent and where you're going to go and so forth. And that's same with the child's habitual residence, when you're doing these types of petitions, you need to make sure that you show in the, if you can have an attorney do it, in the attorney cover letter, where the habitual residence is to meet these particular requirements. And if it doesn't meet it, then you have to show how essentially you're going to, and there's different ways. So what I would do is make sure that, if you're going to have an attorney do it, give me a call or send me an email, and I could guide you a bit on this, because there's all kinds of issues. If the child entered without inspection, is in the United States on a non-immigrant visa, where are they considered to be a habitual resident, and so forth. And so there's different paths that can that can be determinative to show where the child's habitual residence is. So if you do have a case where it's not clear where the USC's habitual residence is and where the child's habitual residence is, there are arguments that could be made to try to make this work. Now, with the Hague country adoption, there are no provisions for older siblings adopted by the same parents. And if you know about adoption, regular adoption petitions, if there is a sibling that's under 18, that adoption can go forward and that person can be petitioned in. So it didn't take that into account. Now the child that's coming in, of course, does not have to be an orphan in order to utilize the Hague Convention procedures. If the child is an orphan, the child can still utilize it, but does not have to. Okay, the child's birth parents, whether it's one parent because the other has abandoned or died or disappeared, they have to freely give their written irrevocable consent to the termination of the legal relationship between the child and the USC who wants to adopt the child. And in the case of where both parents are alive and well and so forth, they both have to show that they are incapable of providing proper care for the child. One reason to do this, that they need to do this, is because once the child turns 21, assuming everything went through and the child's a U.S. citizen, the child cannot then petition the biological parents at that time. So they're giving up all those rights to for the Hague adoption to go through. Now, the Hague Convention, and this is what catches a lot of people by surprise if it's not done properly. The Hague Convention requires USCIS to first determine that the USCs, the United States citizens, are suitable adoptive parents before authorities in the other country place the child with the USC. Okay, so that's a key issue in timing there. So if you're going to do this, you need to, it's called the home study report, you need to make sure that one that is designated by USCIS does make that determination prior to when the country places the child in the custody. Now, this is all done in the best interest of the child. That's what all these provisions are made for, and that's why the U.S. entered into this agreement. So then the U.S. Must decide before the adoption that it will meet the requirements of the convention and U.S. immigration law. Thus, a Hague Convention adoption will only occur if both governments agree that the child will be able to enter the U.S. And by doing that, that's the petition that is filed and approved by the U.S. And then, of course, the Hague Convention country, the central authority, will give their okay. So that all has to be done in the proper sequence to make sure that it is approvable. And the way that's done is they're filed on forms I-800, which is the petition, and the I-800A, which is the application for determination of suitability to adopt. And when I say the petition and the 800A, those are not just filling out forms. Obviously, there has to be all kinds of supporting evidence. There has to be the attorney cover letter, declarations, affidavits, all kinds of other exhibits to make sure that it goes through. The bottom line is they want to make sure that there's no fraud in here, there's no baby selling, that it's all in the best interest of the child. That's what this all goes to. So the I-800A that must be approved before the I-800, okay? And even though if they're filed at the same time, then the I-800 would be provisionally approved before the adoption and before the foreign state determines that the child will be authorized to immigrate. So again, with the Hague Convention, you have very specific steps that you have to follow when doing it. So honestly, if you're going to think of adopting a child under the Hague Convention, before the adoption goes through, before anything goes through, contact an immigration attorney that knows what they're doing to properly put it through in order to make sure that you have the best chance of approval. It would be a shame to go the wrong way and have it denied, or have to do motions to reopen, and before it's all done, the child's all grown. Okay, so the 800A that I was talking about, that's where part of the home study that you're going to get would be approved. Now the home study will come from an agency that's been approved by USCIS to do this, and what they do is they go to your home, they interview you, they do criminal checks, they make sure that you and your spouse are properly able to raise the child and so forth. Okay, so basically, also that will be the also, if the child comes in under the Citizenship Act of 2000, depending on the various factors, that child will become a U.S. citizen automatically, and so that's a great factor as well. So hopefully, I mean, there's lots of specific details and so forth that I haven't gotten into, but hopefully this will give you an idea of what is required for a Hague Convention adoption and what needs to be done, and so that you can get your dream of having a child come into the U.S. Make it easier on yourself and get someone who knows what they're doing. You give me a call, set up a consultation. I'll be happy to help you, and then we'll go from there. More on the coming videos.